There are so many voices out there saying that your net worth is the most important metric of success. As an entrepreneur and a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, I've always wanted to know, how can I kill it in the business world while still maintaining my core values? If you've wanted the same thing, this show is the answer. I want to welcome you to the Latter-day Entrepreneur. I'm your host, Brunson Smith. Let's dive in. Have you ever wondered how the top athletes and performers access that crazy state where they just seem to be in the zone? We interviewed Martin Frey, who was the first man to ever complete the 7 summits and sail the 7 seas. So what that means is he climbed tallest peak on each of the 7 continents and sailed all the 7 seas. And he's the first and the only person to ever do that. And some of the cool things that he shared were, number 1, how he has learned to access flow state. We also talked a lot about the difference between entertainment and adventure. We live in a society that's completely riddled with the need for entertainment, but they don't know that what their body and their mind is actually craving is adventure. And so we have this cheap knockoff called entertainment. Another cool insight that he shares is how, as we can conquer ourselves and how we can employ self-leadership, it will completely catapult us into success in the business world. So excited about this episode. You guys are going to absolutely love it. This is one of my favorite that I've ever done. Let's go ahead and dive in and hear the insights from Martin Frey. All right, Martin, thanks for coming on the podcast. We've also got one of my best friends here, Josh Earl, and it's Martin Frey, not Frey, right?
Correct.
Martin Frey. Martin is the first person ever to summit the tallest peak on every continent, as well as sail the 7 seas. Correct?
That's correct.
And you have a Guinness, that was like a Guinness thing you did, correct?
Guinness World Record.
Guinness.
Yeah.
See, and this is why we do podcasts. We can educate ourselves.
We usually say the 7 summits too.
The 7 summits and the 7 seas.
Yeah.
And has that become a thing for other adventures after that?
Yeah. And even before that, people have done the 7 summits, but I, sort of put my little extra 7 seas on there, kind of made it unique.
Has anyone since done both like you?
No.
Okay. So the first and the only.
As far as I know.
Wonderful. That's pretty neat. So you've done a lot of different things in your life. You've been a businessman, an adventurer. Really quick, before we dive into some of your adventures, I'm kind of curious, what was your business background like?
So I worked in Silicon Valley for what at the time was a company called Cisco, and it was making the routers that built the internet. Basically, we had 85, 90% of the internet, and I was fortunate enough to see the rollout of the internet around the world. It was a lot of fun. I ran post-sale support for a lot of big companies and banks and telcos around the world, and just really fun to see it.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, right before we started the podcast, you were kind of talking about Denali. Tell us more about that.
Well, Denali is my favorite mountain of all the ones I've climbed because it was the transformational experience for me to identify with what it really meant to become a mountaineer. And, a lot of the things I climbed before that here in the Wasatch in Utah were hikes, basically, and they weren't really a full-on mountaineering expedition. And so I'm really grateful that I had that experience. We started out a team of 6 and got up to, by the time we got to 16,000 feet, my buddy Steve Gasser and I were the only ones left. And we ended up getting hit by a storm and a complete whiteout. And by 17,000 feet, he had a massive headache and altitude sickness, which turned out to be cerebral edema, and wouldn't get out of his sleeping bag for a couple of days, was throwing up nonstop, wouldn't eat, massive headache. And the challenge, we couldn't get him down because of the storm. And so fortunately, he got better the next couple of days, and then the storm went on for 6 days. And then we had to make a decision. Do we go for the summit? Do we go back down? We went for the summit. We made it. It was great to be up there with him. And then on the way down, he started throwing up again. And he was in bad shape. We got him down, and everything seemed okay. And then within 2.5 months, he died of a brain aneurysm. And so that was loss of my climbing partner. But it was in that tent during that storm that we had talked about maybe doing the 7 summits together as kind of our next venture. And so I went on in honor of Steve to take on that challenge and do the 7 summits.
So maybe my big question with that is who, while they're stuck in a storm at 17,000 feet, says, I know we're stuck at the bottom of, in this whatever spot. Let's go do 6 more of these things. So was that just, I'm surprised that was the conversation that was had as opposed to, maybe we should retire climbing and maybe we should rethink our lives. But instead you were just stoked to keep going.
Well, I wouldn't even say that. We were just sort of bored and we were pondering what's next or where do we go from here? And Steve threw out, hey, let's think about the 7 summits. And we didn't even really think about what that meant or what it would take to get it done. It was just this little prompting vision sparkle of an idea. And then, later the reality of all of that set in a little more as I sort of got underway.
That's pretty neat. So during what time frame did you do the 7 summits?
So I did Kilimanjaro first. And way back before that, I was just on a safari and I said, hey, let's go climb Kili. And then Denali was really the start of it in 2010. And then I finished the mountains in like 2 or 3 years, something like that.
Okay. Now, Josh was telling me, we had a conversation about this and we were joking with some friends and Josh said, yeah, I want to go climb Denali someday. And my cousin said, you are crazy. Why would you ever want to climb that mountain?
Yeah, he said it was deadlier, more dangerous than anything else I could do, right? I think if we're thinking
it was something like
conversation,
that. Yeah.
Which we were talking, Martin and I, earlier before you came in, kind of about this exact topic, and he had some interesting insights where, well, actually, it would be best for you to even just share it.
So I would say the success rate on Denali is about 50%, those that set out make it to the summit. But there are a number of people who've died. And while I was on the mountain, 3 people died. One guy was a dentist from San Diego, and he was skiing down and never made it to the bottom. A crevasse got him. And two other climbers were on a ridge, traversing a ridge, and fell 3,000 feet. And so that was pretty traumatic because my friend was climbing in that expedition team. And so we had come to 14,000 feet and found my friend pretty distraught because of just what had happened the day before.
And is Denali, so how does Denali rank among other mountains as far as being dangerous for the other 7 peaks?
I've never thought of ranking them that way. I think Denali is very doable. I think they're all very doable. I never felt like I was about to lose my life ever. I know I had a friend, Don Cash, who died on Everest, real close to the summit. And so there is a risk. You realize you're not in a safe place necessarily, but you also don't feel like you're going to die. You think things are in control for the most part, and yet at the same time, you're closer to the edge than you normally are.
So here's a question I have, because if we think about the people listening to this show, right? Entrepreneurs, people interested in business, right? And so far this conversation's been obviously heavy into what you've kind of found a lot of success and notoriety in, which is mountaineering and adventure and all this. But as we're sitting here, you can almost see this dichotomy between your career at Cisco as an executive, it sounds like, and obviously found a lot of success and joy in the executive and business world. Yet, as you're talking about these experiences, this is dangerous, difficult, hard. Obviously takes a lot of time and effort and energy to develop the skills that are needed to summit a mountain like Everest. Where did this journey start for you? And how did that kick off? And how were you able to find balance between your career and that business career and then what you find with adventure?
Well, good question. So I think for me, it started out when I was about 12 and 13, and I went to camp up in Maine, and I learned to sail, and I learned to climb Mount Katahdin, the tallest mountain in Maine. And then at the time, I didn't have a dream or even an idea that where that would take me, but I think some seeds got planted that I could do those things. And then later on, when the opportunity came to really test myself on some bigger adventures, the idea of mountain climbing, sailing, all of that was sort of part of my world and part of where I had some self-efficacy that maybe I could pull it off. But I would also say mountaineering and entrepreneurship are really similar. Okay. You're going about this undertaking. You set your sights on a vision and have a go-to-market strategy, or you have some mountain or some aspirational summit, whatever that may be in life, and you go after it and you gather the resources, or you go from a strategic vision into a strategic game plan, into gathering the resources and embarking on that journey. And then it's a matter of navigating your way through the challenges and obstacles and pivoting and knowing when to hold course, when to pivot, and persevering in spite of the obstacles. And I think they're similar. Balancing the opportunity to do adventure. I have a disabled daughter, and we realized that we had to go on some of these big adventures now, because I won't have a retirement like other people. I'll be home changing diapers and taking care of my daughter. And so that sort of pushed the big adventures earlier in my life when everybody else would have been going to soccer games or something like that.
It's awesome.
That's pretty powerful. You mentioned earlier that you've kind of taken different lessons, right? You've got lessons from the mountains and lessons from the seas. What do those look like?
Well, I think climbing mountains has taught me that I can achieve much more than I perceived for myself. I had to grow into this idea that I could do these kinds of things. Everest wasn't part of my world. I first saw Everest on a business trip to India, and I flew up to Nepal and chartered a plane, flew around Everest. I went, that's insane. How could anybody do that? Couple years after that, I started to think, wow, what would it take if I were to climb Everest, or want to become the person capable of climbing Everest? And then I started to think, I put myself in that vision. And then all of a sudden, I started to identify with the type of person I'd need to be in order to be able to do that. And I think that's a lot about how we progress. It's sort of this envisioning the outcome and the objective, and then sort of arriving at the visual of us and our own identity potentially becoming that. So that's, I think, the big lesson of mountaineering. Sailing, I think, and crossing oceans, that's a great lesson in navigating your way through life and understanding when to hold course, when to pivot, and trusting that we can make good decisions in order to achieve our outcomes in life, and that we can ultimately, sometimes in spite of the fog in front of us and not knowing the future, we can work it out and arrive where we want to go, regardless of which way the wind's blowing.
Okay, so I mean, you've done some pretty intense things. Now, you mentioned earlier you didn't feel on Denali that it was undoable. You felt like it was very climbable, that all of them were. But have you ever had a moment where you thought, all right, I may have screwed this up. I may have put myself in the wrong spot, wrong time, or something like that?
Well, yes, a couple of them. I am really susceptible to being seasick, and I suffered with being seasick all across every. You're looking at a guy who's thrown up in every ocean of the world. Okay. And I wondered numerous times, particularly sailing across the North Pacific, whether I was in the right place. And there was no way to get off the boat, so I didn't have a choice. And we sailed nonstop from China to Seattle. And really, as part of an ocean race, it was brutal. We had 100-mile-an-hour winds. We had 35-foot seas. It was... we broke the bowsprit off the boat. So when we left China, we were 70 feet long. We got to Seattle, we were 65 feet long. And it was brutal. It's
a
really
bad metric to have for a voyage. You lose feet on the boat.
Some of the front end.
So I have a question about this because we've talked a little bit about sailing, and that's something that I have interest in. I get very motion sick. So this is actually, I'm feeling very encouraged by that entire bit there, because I want to get into sailing, but I thought, man, if I get on a boat, am I just do you eventually just adapt? Is that what happens?
Most people do. But whenever I'd go like down into the engine room or something like that, man, it would hit me right away. If I couldn't keep my eyes on the horizon and you go below, in these race boats, you're just slammed back and forth. In fact, they even take the toilet seats off the toilet bowls because guys have gotten castrated. I mean, that's how serious this all is.
Wait. They take the toilet seats off the bowls. I don't like to think about that. That hurts.
I've watched, we have gimbaled stoves where they can pivot in 3 directions. And I've watched pots of spaghetti lift up off the stove, fly across the room, splatter across the wall. And you just say, wow, there goes dinner. So it's pretty grinding out. And the honest truth of it is, that ocean race was harder than Everest for me in terms of what it took out of me. They said, you go on deck every 4 hours and you have these 4-hour watches and you come in and you're supposed to sleep. But I was so wet. They'd say, oh, just wring out your long underwear, get in your sleeping bag, you'll dry out. But I just didn't have the body heat to dry out anything. So I just sat there and shivered, and I was hammered by, a week into it, and we had a long way to go after that.
How long did that whole race take then?
29 days. So
didn't I? Have you done other sailing trips where you kind of you're cruising, taking your time, and do you fish along the way? Or?
Oh yeah. Okay. So sailing the South Pacific, that's like you set a drink on the table and you're watching the sunset and everything is calm. You're in the trade winds and you're sailing downwind all the way to Australia, basically. And we did a lot of fishing along the way. In fact, I caught a 400 plus pound marlin, black marlin, and
while sailing
200-pound tuna. Yeah, we had a great time.
That's pretty rare, isn't it? Even is that rare?
It's rare. It's you're out there in the middle of the Pacific, and it's a great way to catch stuff between the
That's awesome.
Galapagos and the Marquesas.
Now that's neat. With your mountaineering, have you ever had moments like that where you thought, okay, I mean, you seem like you do a lot of research beforehand. How do you keep yourself in a space where you feel pretty safe?
I think you're in the moment. I watched a guy on Everest who had dragged a 250-pound sled across Greenland. Okay, this guy was a Norwegian, super tough. Okay, I mean, he had more stamina and everything to be able to do what he did. I watched him as we were going up through the Khumbu icefall. So we go in the middle of the night because the ice is more stable, but you're going through these huge blocks of ice the size of this room. And the ice is actually moving up to 15 feet a day because it's tumbling down from this glacier up above. And you're also hearing the avalanches come off Nuptse on the right side, and you never know exactly where that's going to end up. And he mentally had a real challenge with that. You could see his anxiety start to build. And more importantly, he didn't have a mechanism to fully calm himself back down and manage that anxiety. And I think I was fortunate enough to be able to maybe self-regulate some of my emotions and to assess the situation for what it was and to keep myself in the moment, and realizing that if you just keep taking one step at a time and still kind of work it, things will probably work out. And I'm grateful that I was able to see some of those differences between what it took to succeed and what are some of the reasons some of those guys dropped out of those expeditions.
So that's actually really interesting to me. My dad tells a story of, so he's a pilot in the Air National Guard up in Alaska. And there were 2 pararescue officers. They're combat rescue officers is the official title, but they go behind enemy lines and rescue soldiers that have been injured. It's a very stressful job.
Oh, it's like the most stressful
The most
job.
stressful, exactly. Because not only are you on the front lines, but you're also expected to save people, and you see some pretty graphic things. And he had a friend who was actually a member of our ward at our church, who was a combat rescue officer. And then he had another friend that he grew up with who was not a member of our faith and didn't have any faith in general. And he watched those two go and join the military at the same time, and then their gradual story arc, if you will, of their experience in the military as combat rescue officers, and how the one who didn't have any faith, or didn't have a faith, I should say, really struggled and had a really hard time being in the military and experiencing those things, and ultimately had a lot of really dark questions and dark experiences, and it was really tough for him, and his quality of life was almost diminished. Whereas his friend who did have faith and attended church and had this relationship with God actually was, you would never know that he was a member of the military or that he served or had seen any of these things because of his outlook on, the afterlife and why we're here and those experiences, which is kind of relating to your story here. I'm curious how your faith has played a part in that experience and the way that you regulate and approach risk and are okay sailing on 29-day trips where people are taking the seats off toilets and going up Everest and Denali. How has that impacted you?
I'm really glad you asked. I just attended a conference by Arthur Brooks. He's the professor at Harvard who teaches leadership and happiness, which has become probably the most popular class at Harvard now. And he's sort of like Laura Santos at Yale, who does the same thing. But they both, but particularly Arthur, talks a lot about your meaning making and how do you perceive your reason for being here, and that ties into your overall purpose and mission and why you're able to cope. And this idea, if you have your why and a rational thought process for it, then you can endure almost anyhow, right? A little bit of Viktor Frankl in there and all that. And so I have been fortunate to feel very much like my Heavenly Father was with me on these journeys, and that I had an opportunity to fulfill part of that jointly created vision, and that I, several times when I had to really dig deep and find new reservoirs of strength, that I felt a sense of stewardship, that I really wanted to be in a position of influence to inspire others, young people, to learn to do hard things for themselves and to realize they can achieve their outcomes in life. And if I could do it, they could do whatever was confronting them. And so I'm grateful the opportunity I've had to uplift others.
I like what Josh was saying, and both of those connections there. There's this interesting distinction, and we talk about fortitude, mental fortitude, which is transferable across every walk of life. I've noticed, and just stories in general. You've got Hacksaw Ridge. Have you seen that show?
Yeah, absolutely.
You've got so many stories, or Sergeant York, which is just a classic. These people who are deeply rooted in their faith, they're nobodies, right? No one notices them. And then one day they're put into a mind-bending situation, and they just center on that faith that has been there the whole time, and it was, quietly living on. And they overcome these incredible odds and have these transformative experiences, and then become the hero. And everyone says, wow, it's just crazy. That guy was a farmer. And I think it's maybe not that simple. I think that it's also, there's something with people that when they're centered on their faith and then they go to pursue hard things, it grounds them throughout the entire experience, the ups, the downs. I feel like a lot of people are ego-driven primarily. And I think that somehow it seems that religion diminishes the ego, recenters you, and allows you to traverse, right? So in your experiences, are you seeing a lot of that with people with their faith or their core values kind of guiding them through some of these tough experiences?
I don't know that everybody goes into these with a a high degree of faith. I'm not really sure I have a good understanding of their religiosity or whatever. I know for me, though, um, I was definitely exercising my faith, and at times really comforted because I felt that Heavenly Father was with me. I also felt very much like He was um, enabling me to be successful. Let me give you a quick example. The night before we were to summit Everest, go for the summit, everybody's lined up in a rope line. They're ready to go. And I cannot find my gloves. And I am searching the latrine tent, the dining tent, my tent. I tore my tent apart, flipped over the air mattress. And finally, I just kneeled down and I said a prayer. I said, Heavenly Father, I've gotten this far. I don't know where my gloves are. There's no REI store, it's not like you can go resupply. And so I was like, I really need your help and help me find my gloves. And when I opened my eyes, there on the air mattress right in front of me were my gloves. And I don't know how they got there. I just have a number of stories like that where I have been uplifted and strengthened and protected in many ways along my journeys. And I'm very grateful for those experiences as they've edified me and enabled me to, remind others that our Heavenly Father is there when we reach out and ask for His help.
That's super neat. Well, it's fun because I've had the chance to rub shoulders with some, different people across different walks, and one of the big themes I hear too, when people do very, very hard things, they find out their source of strength through those hard things. They take that source of strength and they apply it to whatever else in their life. And there's such an interesting correlation. People that summit Everest often do well in a lot of other categories. At least that's been my perspective. I mean,
so do Eagle Scouts, right?
And Eagle Scouts and return missionaries.
Yeah,
and,
right.
You've got a whole list of these different characteristics that seem to.
I definitely believe that man is that he might have joy, right? And that we are to live joyful lives. But I also believe that the greater the struggle, the more growth. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And I don't think a lot of young people are getting challenged in the ways that you really need to build that series of validation points that you can take on the world and succeed. And if they're a little more passive about, moving forward and taking on challenges, then they don't quite getting that sense of confidence that you really need to knock it out of the park. And if you're going to be an entrepreneur or a business guy, you've got to have that conviction, or sales. You got to go after it with just knowing you can make the sale, right? There's got to be this internal core self-efficacy that just says, I can do this. And so that's where these previous trials, struggles, challenges, and that's why I love adventure. Entertainment is what everybody's into right now. And we're constantly satiated with online entertainment, TV, media, you go into the mall, whatever it is, it's just entertainment. But adventure teaches you a whole lot of other skills like decision making, problem solving, risk taking, all these things that stretch you and help you reach your potential through trial and error. And my hope is that young people can really become the hero in their own journey rather than going online and getting to level 7, but that they can really envision themselves and be the protagonist in their own journey and challenge themselves to do hard things. And that's why I love working with youth.
Why do you think youth are so much more drawn toward video games, entertainment, as opposed to adventure? Is that just an availability thing? What do you think is happening societally that's causing that?
Well, I think I grew up a long time ago, and I started with boredom. We had lots of unstructured time. And so we'd come home from school and we'd just go down and say, what are we going to do today? And we'd be like, I don't know. And they're like, let's figure out, hey, let's go build a fort. And so we would put something like that together and have a project that we'd all of a sudden have to put our hearts and soul into. If kids are constantly satiated on a cell phone or an iPad, they're not as likely to find those sparks of creativity that then drive their curiosity to go pursue something. And I think some do, and lots of youth, really do thrive. I'm not saying everybody has this, but I think in general, more people are a little more passive when it comes to those sorts of things.
Mm-hmm.
So their self-determination and the skills of self-determination don't quite mature as quickly as they do with some of those individuals that you're referring to.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you see this plenty too, Josh, but I feel like every third 5-year-old has an iPad that's glued to them literally at all times. And the parents turn on Baby Shark, which is the most annoying song that's ever been written. And then they just play games. And I mean, I've known a few kids, they go nowhere without that iPad.
That's right.
And I'm like, man, this is crazy. Cause I grew up in a home where my parents were, we grew up on a small little farm, right? So I didn't mention this to you, but I've got 12 siblings.
Okay. Wow.
So big old family. Didn't make a lot of money. And we had this little plot of land, and we just did stuff, right?
That's right.
I remember mud pies. That was a thing. Yeah. Go bake them out on the concrete. Dad get mad, but it's such a weird thing because I feel like I'm pretty young, but the gap that happened is unbelievable. I mean, I can see it in my younger siblings.
Can you really? Yeah.
Already. I mean, you can just see just in about a 5-year span, it went from, oh man, so-and-so got an iPhone. Did you hear about that? Or, people are checking out the iPhone. All of a sudden everyone has one.
Yeah.
And now every kid has one. And I think you're right. It's a boredom thing. It's that we're being so sold entertainment. And I think it's being sold to us, right? It's not just like we're choosing it. I think there's some very clever marketing going on as well that is telling us that if we are not constantly entertained, there's something wrong.
That's right.
And so I think those kids, they start to cry or whatever. Okay, let's just get them entertained, give them snacks and a movie, and that'll shut them up for a while. And it's interesting. So,
one, I'm a firm believer in monkey see, monkey do. And Brunson and I specifically, you share your experience, right, of kind of living on that plot of land. Who bought that plot of land, right? It wasn't you and your siblings, right? Your parents got you in that place, and you and I have probably more outdoor experience than the average person our age, right?
Yeah.
But I think our parents and the people we surrounded ourselves with also had something similar. And now as time progresses, we find that more and more and more people sit inside and seek comfort and that, right? Which kind of pulls back to something we talked about earlier, which is this idea of you kind of had this moment where you realized if you wanted to go and do all these adventures, right, you were going to have to do it now instead of in this retirement phase, right? And you made the comment of instead of going to soccer games, you went and climbed mountains. But that the question behind that is climbing Everest takes a substantially more time than going to a soccer game on Saturday night, right? So how were you able to find the time to be that example of doing hard things and getting out and doing that while still having a thriving family life, while still being a successful entrepreneur and businessman? Where were you finding the time for
that's the big question. I'm curious. Yeah. That's how do you balance that?
Well, a couple things. One, I did it when I was older. Okay. So we all have seasons we go through. I was working at Cisco 80 hours a week for years and years and years. And I'm very grateful for the focus and the time that all was. I decided, I was asked to run economic development for the governor of Utah, and that's what got me here in Utah. And when I got here, I also realized, hey, these mountains are right here in our backyard. I can go ski before work and be at work at 9 a.m. And we backcountry ski and stuff like that. And so integrating this outdoor lifestyle, it works very well here in Utah. And challenging ourselves in ways physically, emotionally, mentally, that all build that emotional and mental fortitude is something that I sort of enjoy and get a kick out of. And it reminds me who I am and what I'm capable of. And not everybody wants to go out at 5 a.m. in the morning and go, climb a mountain in the dark. But I'm happy to sort of have that type 2 fun where it's not fun always in the moment. Your hands are cold, your feet are cold. And then you get back to work and you're like, man, that was kind of cool, right?
Type 2 fun. I've not heard that expression.
Oh, yeah. Type 1 fun is fun in the moment. Type 2 fun is, fun after you've got it done and you feel good about it. Type 3 fun is just never fun. It's just a suffer fest.
We always called it, me and my brothers called it the fireside effect. You never want to go, but you're always glad you went. You have to actually show up and experience it. And I say all the time, it's a fireside effect. I mean, just show up. You're not gonna be glad until you get there and start getting through it. But yeah, that's super interesting.
So you referenced waking up at 5 a.m. to go climb a mountain or ski and the type 2 fun and whatnot. When you wake up and the alarm goes off and it pings and it's dark and it's cold and it's January 15th and it's, I'm from Alaska, so I'm thinking 30 below, but here, right. 5 degrees, right? And you're not having fun. How do you muster up the willpower to get up and still do those things despite the fact that it is type 2?
So I remind myself that when I'm on a mountain peak and it's 6:30 or 6:45 a.m. and I'm watching the sunrise and I'm just looking at it and how beautiful it all is, and I'm having this cathartic reconnection and this moment of awe and peace and rejuvenation. One of the things I learned on some of these challenges is you have to have a daily process of recovery and renewal. You can't just go 51 days on Everest without a daily process of recovery and renewal. And we often talk about prayer, we talk about meditation, whatever, poetry, all those things rejuvenate the soul in ways that are important. And whatever your unique way works. But one of mine is watching the sunrise, and and getting in nature where you're smelling the pines and you're just reconnecting with this beautiful world around us and putting all our little petty problems aside for a few moments and then realizing that life is good.
It's awesome.
Well, and there's, this comes back to what we were talking about earlier, which is this dopamine addiction. The dopamine addiction that we have in our society, why would you go out in the mountains when you could be so quickly entertained, but there's no fulfillment through it? And I'm going to go out on a limb here and guess that probably you've got a series of habits in your life that are always, I'm bored. Okay, let's climb a mountain, right? I mean, that seems like, I don't know if that's a fair statement, but it seems like that would be the habit set that you have, is that you're always just going, okay, life is feeling a little dull right now. You don't think, okay, I need to get a new Netflix subscription. It's just more, all right, let's go find another thing to summit or whatever. Does that sound about right?
Well, I think, it's kind of funny. Even my wife will tell me sometimes, she'll say, hey, you need to go get it in the mountains, and just, if I don't get it every so often, I do feel it. We go through cycles and we get busy at work, or we get busy and then all of a sudden we feel like we're getting drained and all of that. And so I may come back physically tired, but I am emotionally and mentally renewed. And I feel very grateful for those experiences. And so I don't particularly enjoy going to the gym. I have a trainer, Aaron, who's I'm so grateful for, because he gets me there, and somehow I'm committed to keep going. But it's not my happy place. So when I'm in the mountains, I just feel good and I can thrive. And some people, maybe it's going to the gym. Some people, it's going for a bike ride or whatever it is. I just hope people pursue those things and build it into their regular routine, and all those other side rituals that we do in order to reconnect with ourselves, bring our body, mind, and spirit into alignment, so that we can be in the moment, focus on others, and not be not let that spiral of anxiety start downward, but that we can build an upward spiral of well-being and manage our own well-being.
How much of this do you think is your personality? Maybe you think that you're just someone that loves adventure, or how much of this do you think is societal? Do you think that everyone could go through, develop that same love of adventure that you have?
Well, yes. I think let's define adventure for a minute, because a lot of people think we're referring to climbing mountains or sailing across oceans. Adventure is anything where you step outside your comfort zone, take on a challenging opportunity for personal growth where there is risk and uncertainty of success. So, whether that's entrepreneurship, whether it's learning to paint or write poetry, those are all adventures that you can subscribe to. Um, so I think it's this process of growing, exercising our faith, moving forward. The joy of progression for me is much greater than the joy of sitting on the couch and staying within my status quo.
I love that definition you said, where there's an uncertainty of success.
Mm-hmm.
I've never thought about adventure that way, but that is what gives it the spark, right? Is that if it's a sure thing.
That's right. And otherwise, it's entertainment, and we don't grow. And so, one of the things that we do a lot with youth is we're trying to increase their tolerance for uncertainty so they're more likely to step outside their comfort zone. And so, we'll take them rappelling or rock climbing or something where there is a high level sense that, wow, I may fall, or I don't know how this is going to play out. So, they're nervous, and we're putting them through this sort of stressful experiences. And we're using adventure as an intervention so that they can build their competency and confidence that they can undertake whatever the challenge is in their life and not succumb to anxiety along the way. So I personally believe that the lack of adventure is one of the causes of some of the anxiety that these youth are struggling with. And so I do think adventure is a prescriptive medicine that people can embrace in order to build that confidence and self efficacy within themselves that they can do hard things and build a series of validation points that they can take on the world and all the challenges we face in life.
So you talked about earlier, you mentioned times and seasons and how there was a time of your life when you were working 80 hours a week, and
Yeah.
now you have much more time to adventure. Understanding that definition of adventure, going back to that time in your life when you were working so hard and so diligent in that, were there small outdoor adventures that you found time to do, or how did you find and seek adventure in your day-to-day life back in that time?
So, Silicon Valley, we're pretty close to the ocean. But I'll give you an example. I love going to the ocean. The mountains are a little further away in California, but I remember one Super Bowl weekend or a Super Bowl Sunday. Who I don't know who was playing, but I said, hey, I'm not going to sit and watch television all afternoon. I'm going to take my boat out and go explore. And I got to play with the whales, and I actually found a dead body floating there and had the Coast Guard come get it.
Oh,
And so I had this amazing adventure, even out there by myself, and really loved that whole experience instead of just, being an observer of life.
I'm seeing this interesting shift where for the longest time we thought our society evolved to avoid cold, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Our society evolved to avoid heat. Our
Right.
society evolved to avoid all these things. And now we're making this shift. Now we do cold plunges for health.
Right.
I was reading these studies. Was I talking to you about this, Josh, about the
Huberman?
Okay, yeah, the sauna, right? I think it was something like 20 minutes a day. And your risk for all these different heart problems they're negligible at a certain point. And it was like, what? So if I just go sit and bake at 160 degrees for 20 minutes a day, and force myself into what seems like a horrible survival thing, I'm going to live really long. And if I go plunge in icy water that, makes me want to scream, it's like, oh, that's going to be so good. It's just funny that all these things that we've societally pushed away from are what were giving us vibrancy and life and actually helping us live longer. Society has kind of gone full circle where we swung the pendulum towards comfort. And now we've got horrible mental health in our society right now. I mean, it's unbelievable. And everyone has depression. Everyone has anxiety. Everyone has a list of these issues. And I'm not, trying to be insensitive to people that suffer with that. But I really think, and I'm sure that you would agree with this, that the answer is get outside sometimes. I don't know a lot of depressed people that climb a lot, like rock climbing. I don't know a lot of rock climbers that have crippling anxiety, even if they started that way, because something about getting out there and putting yourself in survival, which is what happens. I mean, I don't know, at least for me, I hate the feeling of falling above pretty much everything else. And rock climbing, you have that constant risk of not succeeding. And that's where the adventure comes from. And afterwards, you're like, man, that was amazing. I loved that. But every single handhold, you're thinking, at any moment, I could not be able to make this climb. So, yeah, this seems like there's that interesting shift happening. Are you seeing that a little bit as well?
Oh, absolutely. And, I think one of the things that used rock climbing as a good example, when we're in a challenge that our capability sort of matches the challenge, we reach this flow state. And we're just find that groove. You watch Stephen Curry and the end of a basketball game, Michael Jordan, they're in this flow state and experiencing moments of awe and moments of flow states are really empowering. And they're, part of that cathartic renewal process. Sometimes when we're just going through our day-to-day motions, we don't have those sparks of renewal. And then we're sort of in this grind and we slowly wear down. And then we're tired. And so we're eating more calories because we're tired or we're not sleeping well. And so as we look to embody those habits and rituals that enable us to be strengthened, I think one of the things we need to teach a lot of young people in particular is how do you form character strengths? How do you build perseverance? How do you build resilience? How do you build an optimistic mindset? And a lot of people don't fully understand that. So we try very hard to give people the tools that they can actually use to build resiliency or to um, find those flow state moments that then all of a sudden they're like, wow, I got this. I can do anything.
Flow state's a big one for me. I feel like that's something it's kind of this mystical, chi kind of thing where it's like, okay, if I'm in flow, then, you feel quite invincible. It's a very interesting thing. And I love that definition as well, that flow happens when your challenge threshold matches your competency or, maybe something like that. Yeah. And so with that, how do you find that you've been able to kind of get yourself into that flow state without, pushing beyond? How do you know how to gauge that? By pushing the boundary?
I find it a lot when I have what I call the bliss point. And I'm climbing a really tough mountain, and the bliss point is the moment you realize you're going to make it to the top. Or I did a 10-day adventure race one time. We were worn out, we're grinding it.
What's an adventure race?
Adventure race is a 4-man team that goes into the through this like 500-mile challenge course, and you mountain bike for a couple hundred miles. You trek for 100 miles or so. You're kayaking for 100 or 200 miles.
Sounds amazing.
I look over at Brunson and we both perk up a little bit. It's like,
that sounds interesting.
Absolutely. I love adventure racing. You might have heard of the Eco Challenge or Primal Quest, some of the big ones, but those are big expedition races. So I was in one of these races, and I remember we were doing it through the San Juan Islands in Washington, and we had come to this one checkpoint. And I'm looking into the fog, and I knew that the finish line was only 26 miles away. And it was this last paddle to get to the finish line. And I just knew I was going to finish. And my friend saw this look on my face, just pure delight. But it's sort of this solid, I've got this. And that's that bliss point and he caught it on camera. And so I'm really grateful for that photo because that's that moment of invincibility. And as we conquer one mountain, we realize, hey, I could take on a bigger mountain next time or whatever that may be. And so those moments of validation are important as we think of who we are, what we're capable of. And I love adventure because each adventure is sort of this expanding sense of my own identity about who I am and what I can do in life.
Well, and this is kind of fundamental to entrepreneurship. At its core is that part of the reason that we do this is because the 9 to 5 just isn't cutting it. We're not hitting flow state in the 9 to 5. And so we're saying, okay, I'm going to take on something that's, man, I hope I can bear the burden.
Right.
And then you have those moments. And I know that we've probably all felt this where you go, oh man, okay. Yeah, your skills ramp up and you hit that point where you just feel so powerful because you really feel like you're utilizing that capacity that God gave you. And then you're creating things, you're changing things, I think it's the act of creation. I think that's why we love video games. Why is Minecraft so popular? We love to create something. We want to see something. We want to see the empire come up from the ground. And when we're maximizing that capacity that God gave us, I'm not poo-pooing on people that have a 9-to-5 job, but it really is interesting that we have this certain, especially some of us, we just are like, no, this is not enough.
Yeah.
I want to be pushed. I want to be maxed out.
Well, it's interesting too, because we take, for instance, Brenton and I work in the sales industry right now, and you talk about bliss point, right? And flow state and bliss point and how they almost coexist, right? And this bliss point in a sales specifically where you reach the very end of the pitch and you know you're going to get it.
Yeah.
And it's a high.
It is. It's addictive.
It's addicting. And you think of all the salespeople that you know, and they all seem to have a similar personality. And it's someone that really likes that feeling,
yeah,
right? Of getting someone to agree with them. You look at entrepreneurship, I'm sure there's similar things. I haven't trekked down that path yet, but I'm sure it's very similar. But that's just human nature, right? Is that throughout life, regardless of if it's a good or bad bliss point, we're going to do things that in turn give us that emotion and feeling, which is likely why, as we look and we're talking about video games, as we're talking about addiction, a lot of things that youth today struggle with, not just youth, but adults. I know grown men who are 40 years old and they sit on, modern warfare all weekend and their relationships are falling apart, but they're finding that bliss point in this other area that might be a little bit easier than if they trudged through the adventure of strengthening a marriage. Right.
Yeah.
So in your experiences, you've kind of mentored and coached youth and adults and really just have this wealth of knowledge and experience. What have you found to be the most impactful way to take someone who's addicted to that feeling of bliss point, maybe in something that's like video games or something else, and you've used that to kind of transition them towards something more fulfilling?
Well, I think, many of the things we're describing are dopamine rushes in a way. And I go back to Arthur Brooks and, he said the danger is when you're doing these dopamine rushes by yourself and you're not having that inner connection with others or that personal connection with others. And so I think I've never tried adventures by myself. I've trained by myself, but I typically do hard things with other people. And there's a sense of jointly arriving at that finish line or the summit or whatever. I also, and I relish that. And I think particularly those sort of habits and behaviors that hold us back and don't, aren't uplifting, they're the ones you have to be careful of. And, he gave examples of, moral issues or drinking by yourself, all those things that can really defeat you emotionally and mentally. And what we really need is eye contact and touch and all those things that come with close connection. We ran summer camp this summer with 140 kids, and we took their phones away for a full week, 5 days. And it was really interesting because on the last night, I asked them all, how did they feel not having their phone for 4 days at that point? And it was amazing to me because they actually loved and cherished not having their phones. And they were really hesitant to go back to their normal life where they had to deal with phones and schools and all that kind of stuff and show up at a cafeteria table with everybody looking at their phone, not knowing if they can sit down and join the crowd. And they felt much more in the moment, much like it was much easier to make friends with other campers and to really find that energy and that synergy from those companionships and relationships. And I was just fascinated by that.
It's interesting. I read a book. Have you read Dopamine Nation?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So there's this part. Have you read it as well, Brenton?
I haven't, no.
All right. Well, 2-1 here. You've got to buy the book.
Add to the list.
Yeah. I hope I don't butcher this because it's been a little bit. But at the very beginning, it talks about how our mind and our emotions, and specifically, are kind of like a teeter-totter. And where, as you talk about the scripture of men are that they might have joy, it's in the same chapter. It's talking about hardship, right? And men need pain and suffering in order to feel joy and understand joy, right? And joy without the suffering, you don't have joy. You're just a blob of mush, right? And so in this book, it talks about your emotions being a teeter-totter and how we're supposed to have the difficulty in order to experience the joy and be well balanced and kind of feel both things. But in our brain, as we get addicted to dopamine, we just layer on and layer on and layer on. And the teeter-totter starts to get imbalanced because of all that weight and all the dopamine hits we're getting. And we just fry our dopamine receptors. And then in the book, it describes them as little gremlins, right? These little evil gremlins that try to get and force the teeter-totter back into balance, which is anxiety, depression, just all, if we're not going to go put ourselves in hardship and hard situations, our brains will do it for us. And at that point, that's where you deal with all these really dark emotions and things that people struggle with. And so it's really enlightening to me as we're talking, right? And interacting with you, Martin, understanding and feeling like you're at a really healthy place mentally and emotionally. And now understanding your story, it's like, okay, well, it's because you've done the 29-day sailing trips across the North Pacific, right? You know what
I know what misery is. Yeah,
exactly. So you know what misery is, and you put yourself in it. And so the gremlins aren't running rampant in your mind, right? Which reminds me, I had a mission companion whose favorite quote was, choose hard now or hard will choose you later.
Yeah. That's really good. And I think one of the things we try to teach people is we want them to experience emotion. And that comes from our limbic system, right? Whether that's fight, flight, or freeze, or all of those emotions and trials of life. But we want them to process it, we want them to process it in the prefrontal cortex so that their response to those situations is appropriate, right? And they're making the right emotional response, and they're course correcting their responses through metacognition. They're aware of their own thinking and behaviors. And so mindfulness is the process of exercising your prefrontal cortex's ability to master the limbic system, or put the limbic system subservient to the prefrontal cortex. And we sort of make the amygdala the slave of the executive brain, right? And so I love the ability for people to learn how to do that, and youth can learn this too. And it's really fun to start them down this journey where a lot of people think mindfulness is this, Near Eastern religious kind of thing. It's not really. It's just the way we exercise muscles or we do other things to strengthen ourselves. Mindfulness is that same practice of continually refocusing our brain and not letting it let those emotions just carry us on all the little distractions in life.
So as you're running summit journeys, right, and you take the 100 and some odd youth this summer out, right? I've been on plenty of adventures where a group of us get together at, I went to BYU and we go decide to hike the Y, and we go up and then we come back down and cool, I'm a little sweatier and
Awesome. Right.
a little dustier, and it was what it was, and I have no desire to go back, right? What kind of specific things are you doing while you're on these adventures in order to help those youth find those experiences and train and practice mindfulness and discover that?
Right. So we always design the adventure experience to create a particular outcome. So, for example, if we want to teach decision making, we'll take them whitewater kayaking. All right. And then they have to make a lot of fast decisions without all the information. Maybe we want to teach deferred gratification. So maybe we'll slog them up a mountain and talk about, type 2 fun along the way, or perseverance and that sort of thing. Sometimes if I want to teach resilience, I'll use sailing as an analogy. And so we'll teach them that they can make that sailboat go anywhere they want, regardless of which way the wind is blowing, and that they can navigate their way through skill to be able to achieve their objectives in life. And so building those transformational experiences is the fun part of helping and enabling youth to go from point A to point B and to have that growth experience. And then we always have reflection time individually and as a group where we want to make sure that they've anchored the experience. And so they understand what the takeaway was supposed to be, the life lesson, and that they secondarily, they know how to apply that to other areas of their life. And so when that's what we've built these adventure experiences, whether it's a day trip or whether it's a week-long adventure camp where we're building on more progressive themes and tying it in with leadership development and all that sort of thing. But that's the core of how we move forward in life, and then we try to habituate those behaviors so they become instinctual responses to certain circumstances, and then they're just not having to, fret about things. They just sort of embrace the challenge and feel confident that they can, you know, arrive on the other side in one piece.
That's fantastic. I've noticed that there seems to be, it's funny, I talk to my friends all the time and I hear this so often, these two things particularly. Man, I wish I just had a little more confidence, or man, I just wish I had more motivation. And I hear that constantly, right? Motivation, confidence. And so as I'm hearing you talk, I think to myself, well, part of the problem with motivation is that it's fake, right? It's a completely ethereal idea that we've created. And we're like, if I just had more motivation, it's like, no, it's discipline that carries you. And coming back to what Josh was saying a little bit, it's that if we can correct some of the way we deal with fun and entertainment, and we can shift that to more of an adventure, holistic type 2 type of fun, I think motivation becomes, it just shifts, because your dopamine, you get such a massive rush from achieving things in the real world. Whereas if you limit that dopamine receptor and it's, I just need, constant little, that drip system in me for my dopamine fix, your motivation's gone. It's depleted. And then of course, if there's that happening, you don't feel good about yourself. And so I was funny. I was running alongside this guy once. I attempted a 100-mile run. I got halfway.
Oh, that's noble, man. That's gutsy.
And I think I knew when I started. I said, I mean, and that's where I failed, right? It was mentally, right? We talk about mental fortitude, and it's funny because I know I didn't fail physically. My body was hurting. I've never been in pain like that before, but I knew that I saw guys are hurting way more than I was, and they finished the race.
Yeah.
But that was my first
That's
real
a great
attempt.
Lesson.
Oh, it was. I mean, I wish
the body can do it if the mind can.
Yeah, and I really believe, and it's it's unfinished business now. So someday, I was running alongside this guy, and he said, as we were talking, you kind of get a little philosophical when you're tired and hurting, and I said, so why do you keep running these things? Because he said, yeah, this is number 12 for me, number 12, 100-miler. And he wasn't a little guy, He said, why do you keep doing this, man? You're 50? I said, yeah. He's like, every single time that I finish one of these, I feel truly invincible for months afterwards. Anything comes up, I can handle it. Anything happens, I've got this. And they said, then there's the little moments too, where I think to myself, if I just do these little things for my wife, my marriage will be better. And he said, normally I'd be, I'll get around to it. And because I've done so many hard things and I've recalibrated my definition of what's difficult, I think I just ran 100 miles. I can get up off the couch, go buy those flowers, go make that gesture. And he said, it's been a paradigm shift over and over and over again about how he defines what's hard in his life. And as I'm hearing this, this is probably a big, we don't have a silver bullet, but we have a lot of golden BBs, that help us be successful in our business pursuits and our family lives that we want to create. I mean, the point of this podcast really is fundamentally, how do we be successful, but still have our soul with us, be good men along the way. And so as I'm hearing you talk, I'm like, there's something there with the training you're doing. You said you had 5 points, correct?
Yeah.
For these young men.
We have sort of pillars that we often bring to the different experiences, whether that's camp or on a young men's high adventure trip or those sorts of things. But we really want them to have an adventure mindset, this willingness to embrace challenges where there's risk and uncertainty, but this idea that they're going to go after this thing like a misogi, right? A Japanese challenge that you've got a 50% chance of succeeding at, right? As a 100-miler is like 10% chance of succeeding, but and that you're all in and you're gonna just deal with the uncertainty, but you realize I'm going after it. Then self-efficacy, this belief in your own capability to achieve your outcomes, and this, this act of faith that, like, I had to, go buy a sailboat before I knew I could sail around the world, right? And so that act of faith is what led me to later success. But that little engine that could in you that says, I think I can, and you build on that.
Can I ask you a question on that point? If you had a young man that you're working with and he said, I don't think that I can, where would you start with him? How would you help him find that?
It's kind of funny. You talked about motivation, and you talked about
confidence,
perseverance, or competence. So I like to take like a high school basketball star and bring him up in front of the audience and say, "Hey, man, you're really cool. You're on the varsity team. You're only a junior. How'd you get there?" And he goes, "Oh, yeah, I was on the JV team and I practiced, was really good." And I said, "Oh, that's awesome. How'd you get on the JV team?" Right. And we break it down. And finally, it's like, I asked my dad to put up a basketball hoop, and, I was practicing in my backyard, and then, I got a little better and jump shots or something. So that whole thing is really fun to break down. And I had a professor, Angela Duckworth, who studied Olympic athletes.
She wrote Grit, didn't she?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so grit is this combination of passion and perseverance. And you need both. You need that motivation and the drive that sort of comes up from within you. And for me, sometimes that's just curiosity. It starts to wonder whether, if I could maybe see if I could do that. And then the perseverance is like, okay, if I keep at this long enough with sort of disciplined practice and purposeful practice, that's a real differentiator, and I can learn to become a guy who could one day climb Everest or something like that. And so you put those two things together and they become powerful. And then along the way, we develop competency, and competencies lead to confidence, which reinforces that whole cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that upward spiral and I call it, what do I call that? In my master's thesis, I wrote about the why adventure matters. And it's this upward cycle that happens through this adventure or exercising of faith in the beginning.
Oh, that's super neat. So that was point 2, correct?
Sorry.
Or was that point 3?
No, self-efficacy is point number 2.
Okay.
Number 3 is self-determination. And that's this ability to figure out how you're going to achieve your goals in life. Okay. You've got to gather the resources. You've got a project plan. You've got to think through all the habits and the decision-making and the risk-taking that you have to obviously do to put your game plan in place. Number 3 is resilience, and what happens when you fail or you have a major setback. Do you hold course? Do you pivot? Do you give up? Are you defeated emotionally? Or can you really become anti-fragile? And can you not just bend with like the willow tree and adapt to the situation, but can you all of a sudden say, "Oh, I failed, but I'm learned from it, and I'm now going to rethink about who I am and how I can go forward." And so that's really the finer points of resilience. And then finally, it's this, what I call self-leadership. It's this ability to build those character strengths and the habits that we need in order to succeed and really create that upward spiral of well-being, and so that we don't burn out or we don't give up along the way, and can not only achieve our aspirational goals, but that we can become that individual, our ideal self, our best self, and become more Christ-like and achieve our overall aspirational goals in life.
That's amazing. Now you've taken all of this, you've plugged it into these youth adventures that you're doing. Summit Journeys, is that what it is, or Summit Adventures?
No, Summit Journeys.
Summit Journeys. And that's kind of that's where a lot of your time is going right now, isn't it?
It is. It's a great nonprofit. We take, this summer, we were doing an adventure at least every other day and taking young people out on adventures. Last year, we did over 100 adventure trips and served about 1,600 youth. This year, we took on the camps, and that was a big success. And now I can already see that we're going to double the number of kids we had in camp and have over 300 this year. And so everything's building out and kind of fun. We've got everything from snowshoe trips and rock climbing and backpacking and sailing and all these kinds of adventures. And it's really fun to take youth out and challenge them. And sometimes we even intentionally get them lost just to see if they can figure out how to get back.
Yeah, that's a special feeling. That's again, it's funny how there's certain things that were so normal, the feeling of being lost, and a lot of people will go their whole childhood and never have that happen because they're so protected from that. And I was telling you this, wasn't I, Josh, about they're finding these interesting studies. They think that part of the reason, or something they think that might be affecting our health, is that a normal male can sometimes go his whole life without ever really bleeding. And it was like this weird thing. They thought that there's a theory now that people that they say that donating blood could be very good for you because our bodies weren't designed that way. Like, I mean, by the time you were 35, you'd lost a hand and you'd fallen down a mountain and, you may be missing an eye at that point. And then, in our society now, it's like you might get a paper cut, maybe.
So this is a really good point. So I do a lot of speaking. And when I speak to elementary schools, I ask the kids to raise their hand. And when was the last time you needed a Band-Aid? And it's fascinating because not often do they need Band-Aids. They're not climbing trees anymore. They're not doing anything. Yeah. We used to come back banged up, bloody, and
that's crazy.
Right? We had the lidocaine get sprayed on our knees regularly, and scabs. We always had scabs on our legs, and it isn't like that.
And you're seeing that just in real time change.
Right? And I'm fascinated by that and saddened by that because I do think testing yourself and finding those limits of what you can and cannot do. Let me give you this story. When I was a kid, the first adventure I remember was climbing the tree in my backyard. And initially, I couldn't even reach the lowest branch. That's how small I was. And then one day I got a hold of it and I could just hang there, and that's all I could do. And as I got a little stronger, I was able to get a leg up there and then sit on that lower branch. And then I got where I could climb up the tree. And I remember one day it was windy, and I wedged my foot in a fork of the branch, or the fork of the tree, to try to get a third purchase. I was hanging on with two hands. And then all of a sudden, I couldn't get my foot out. And I'm up there by myself, and my foot's stuck in the tree.
Yeah.
And I had to reach down and solve my problem. And I untied my shoe, and I wiggled my foot out, and then wiggled my sneaker and got that loose, and then had to retie my shoe while the wind's blowing and things are shaking. And I just remember solving my own problem and doing that. And I remember that I learned from that experience to trust my grip over my fear of falling. And that, to me, was the power of adventure that came very early in my life, and something for which I'm very grateful for. So I've never felt like adventure was a bad thing. It was always something to embrace and learn from. And I think that probably is one little thing that changed the trajectory of my life in a way that, led to other bigger things down the road.
When we were talking on the phone, we went through a bunch of things. And at one point I mentioned that I ride motorcycles, and of course he does as well. So, what do you have any hobbies that you are, I feel like you do everything. I mean, we've talked about like 20 of them already, and you seem like you're very proficient. Are there any hobbies that are still on the list? Like, I want to learn that. Or have you already pretty anxiously engaged most of the stuff that you've wanted to do?
Well, I think, I'm driven now by trying to enable others to achieve their summits in life. I don't feel like I have anything I need to prove to myself or to anyone else for that matter. But I think there are challenges that I look forward to just for adventure's sake. I'd like to probably sail around the North Pole and go back to the Arctic and test myself in some ways up there. And I think that will be a lot of fun. But I'd also, like to travel, go see New Zealand. I haven't been there yet. There are a few countries. When we sailed around the world, we did 41 countries, but there are a few I missed along the way, and I want to go hit those. And so, but I'm pretty content. And the idea, Arthur Brooks wrote a book called Strength to Strength, and David Brooks wrote a book called Second Mountain, where this idea of committing to something where you're giving back and you're finding fulfillment in new and different ways, I think is really the stage of life I'm in now. And I really enjoy, taking kids out and teaching them how to rock climb. And all of a sudden you watch their eyes, we took this 12-year-old girl and her eyes just lit up, and her peers, as she's rappelling down the mountain, are cheering her on. And all of a sudden this sort of sense of self of who she was, where in many situations I could see she didn't feel like she measured up. And then all of a sudden she's, a foot off the ground and feeling like she's conquered her world. Or another kid named Jared, who is a little on the autistic spectrum, and we took him fishing and he caught his first fish, and he's, we're taking photos of it and he's feeling so good. And then by the end of the day, he caught 7 fish, and he's like, I'm a master fisherman. And then all of a sudden you realize, wow, that was so cool. We made a difference in his life. And I just love those kinds of things right now. So
it's those little wins that kind of set us on a path, right?
Yeah.
When you're young, you got your foot stuck and said, you know what, I can overcome this. He caught 7 fish in a day. And I really think that, I mean, what a beautiful mission, because that is part of it, is we're giving these young kids the chance to have those wins.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so they are living a very comfortable life. Some of them are really coddled and not having the freedom even. They're all in lessons, or they're doing sports or something where that's very structured. And so I'm not against sports. I just think we also need that freedom and the unstructured play. And
the high chance of failure.
And then that leads to adventure and a higher chance of failure and bigger challenges, all that sort of thing as they get a little older. But that's where we're hopefully creating some of those opportunities for them to then go through that process.
Awesome. Martin, thanks so much for chatting with us. And Josh, thanks for all the great input and questions. I think this is a pretty awesome conversation here. So if people are trying to get in touch with you or learn about more what you're doing with youth, where's the best place for them to go for that?
Yeah, you can go to our website at summitjourneys.org or reach out to me at martin@summitjourneys.org. And would love to have you either come volunteer and help take youth out on adventures, or be part of our staff at camp, or just come sign up for an adventure and we'll go have some fun together.
Awesome. Love that. Thank you.